I saw the message 17 seconds before the ship's AI did. It was printed on the hull in letters 3 meters tall, scratched into the outer plating with something that left metal curled like paper, and it said, "You should not have come back." I didn't understand it then. We hadn't been anywhere to come back from. This was our first approach to the structure, a megastructure so vast it had its own gravitational field, drifting in a region of space our charts called the exclusion scatter, a zone beyond mapped routes where salvage crews went to die or get rich. The message didn't make sense until I realized the letters weren't facing outward. They were facing in. Someone had written them from inside the structure, looking out at us, knowing we would arrive. The timestamp on the metal read 43 years in the future. That was when I knew we were already gone. We'd picked up the structure's signature 6 weeks earlier, a dense energy bloom that registered on our salvage rig's deep scanner like a dying star. Captain Voss called it a miracle. Salvage work in the scatter was mostly debris fields and gutted stations, the ruins of failed colonies and corporate wars, but this was different. The reading suggested intact technology, possibly pre-collapse engineering, the kind of find that could set up a crew for life. We altered course immediately. 18 days of hard burn brought us close enough to see it with naked eyes. It looked like a city folded into itself, a geometric nightmare of towers and habitation rings stacked in configurations that hurt to look at directly, as if the architecture refused to settle into three-dimensional space. Voss stood at the viewport for 6 hours without speaking. Our engineer, Rucker, ran the scans 3 times because he didn't believe the first 2. The structure was 8 kilometers across at its widest point, composed of alloys that shouldn't exist and generating power levels that suggested a population in the millions. But there were no life signs. No heat signatures. No movement. Just silence and that enormous, impossible geometry hanging in the void like a monument to something we couldn't name. We docked at what looked like a receiving port, a yawning hangar cut into the structure's lower axis. The airlock cycled without input from us, as if it had been waiting. Voss sent me in first with Rucker and Chen, our navigator. The interior was pressurized, breathable atmosphere, temperature regulated to exactly 21 degrees. The lights came on as we moved through the corridors, motion-activated systems responding to our presence. Everything was clean. Everything was new. The walls were smooth alloy with inlaid panels displaying information in a language I almost recognized, symbols and syntax that felt like looking at my own handwriting through warped glass. Chen stopped in front of one panel and touched it. The text shifted, rearranged itself, and suddenly I could read it. It said, Residential Sector 7. Population capacity, 240,000. Current occupancy, 0, Chen pulled her hand back. We kept moving. The structure's layout made no sense. Corridors bent in directions that shouldn't exist, curving back on themselves in ways that left us disoriented. We marked our path with chemical tracers, but twice we found ourselves back at the same intersection without retracing our steps. Rucker suggested the structure was rotating or reconfiguring, but the walls were solid. There was no movement. Just geometry that refused to cooperate with our expectations. After 3 hours we found what looked like a central plaza, an enormous open space surrounded by towers that rose until they disappeared into shadow. The floor was dark stone, polished to a mirror finish, and in the center was a fountain that wasn't running. The water was frozen mid-flow, suspended in the air in perfect droplets and streams, crystalline and motionless. Chen approached it carefully. She reached out and touched one of the droplets. It didn't move. It wasn't ice. It was water, liquid and frozen simultaneously, held in a moment that refused to pass. That's when we found the first body. It was lying near the fountain, face down, wearing a suit identical to mine. Same manufacturer, same model, same salvage company patch on the shoulder. I knelt beside it and turned it over. The helmet's faceplate was cracked, and through the splintered glass I could see my own face looking back at me. Same scars, same implant sockets behind the ears, same everything. The suit's mission log was still running. I pulled it up on my wrist display. The last entry was dated 43 years from now. It said, "Structure is not stable. Timeline degradation confirmed. Do not attempt salvage. Do not board." If you are reading this, you are already inside and it is too late to leave. Chen started screaming. Not loud. Just a thin, continuous sound like she'd forgotten how to stop. We ran. We didn't plan it, didn't discuss it. All three of us just turned and ran back toward the docking port. The corridors had changed. The walls were different, the layout rearranged. We followed the chemical tracers but they led us in circles, brought us back to the plaza 4 times before Rucker stopped and grabbed my arm. He pointed at the fountain. The water was moving now, flowing slowly, completing the arc it had been frozen in. Around the plaza the towers were lit, windows glowing with soft light, and through those windows I could see people. Not moving, just standing there, hundreds of them, thousands, all facing inward toward the plaza, toward us. Chen had stopped screaming. She was staring at one of the towers, at a window 6 floors up, and when I followed her gaze I saw her standing there, older, wearing clothes I didn't recognize, her face pressed against the glass. Her lips were moving. I couldn't hear what she was saying but I could read it. She was saying, "Run." The structure started to hum. It was a low vibration that came from everywhere at once, felt more than heard, and with it came a smell like ozone and burning copper. The lights in the towers began to flicker, not randomly but in sequence, traveling through the structure in waves. Rucker's suit computer started screaming alerts. He pulled up a diagnostic and went pale. According to his sensors, we'd been inside the structure for 6 days. My readout said 4 hours. Chen said 18 minutes. None of us had the same time. The structure was doing something to duration itself, stretching and compressing it, and we'd been walking through zones where seconds lasted hours and hours passed in heartbeats. Vasa's voice came through comms, distant and distorted. She was shouting at us to get back to the ship, said we'd been dark for 3 weeks, said she'd almost left. 3 weeks. We'd been inside for hours. We found a different corridor and followed it blind. The walls were lined with screens now, all of them showing the same thing, surveillance footage of us, but wrong. Different versions. In one I was alone, screaming at empty air. In another all 3 of us were dead, our bodies sprawled across the plaza. In a third we were older, gray-haired and exhausted, moving through the same corridors like we'd been there for years. Chen stopped looking. She closed her eyes and let Rucker guide her. I couldn't stop watching. In one screen I saw myself sitting in a room I didn't recognize, talking to someone off camera. I looked calm. I looked like I'd been there forever. The person I was talking to stepped into frame. It was Vas. She looked exactly the same as she did now, not a day older, and she was holding a weapon to my head. The me on the screen was smiling. The docking port was open when we reached it, but the ship was different. Same model, same registration, but the hull was scarred and patched, blast damage repaired with mismatched plates, and through the viewport I could see someone moving inside. We'd sealed it when we left. No one should have been aboard. Rucker opened the airlock anyway. We didn't have a choice. Inside, the ship smelled wrong, lived in and stale, and the control deck was covered in modifications we hadn't made. Charts were pinned to the walls, dozens of them, all showing the structure from different angles, with notes scrawled in handwriting I recognized as mine. Mission logs were stacked on the NAV console. I picked up the topmost one and opened it. The first entry was dated 6 months from now. It said, 14th salvage attempt. Structure continues to expand. Population estimates revised to 12 million. Still no contact. Still no exit. Voss is gone. Took the shuttle 3 weeks ago. Don't think she's coming back. Chen was at the pilot's seat. She'd pulled up the ship's clock, was staring at it without blinking. The date read 43 years in the future. Exactly. To the day. Rucker started pulling at the airlock controls, trying to undock, but the system wouldn't respond. The ship was locked to the structure, hard-sealed, and when he tried to override it manually, the console just displayed a single line of text: departure not permitted. Mission incomplete. I asked what mission. We'd never been given a mission beyond salvage. The console flickered and new text appeared: recovery of survivors. Reintegration protocol active. Timeline stabilization in progress. None of us knew what that meant. That's when Voss came through the inner airlock. Not our Voss. A different one. She was older, maybe 10 years, and she was carrying a rifle I didn't recognize. She looked at all three of us for a long time before speaking. When she did, her voice was flat, empty. She said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know it would be you." Chen asked what she meant. Voss just shook her head. She told us the structure was called Bastion. It was the last city. Humanity's final retreat after the collapse escalated, after the wars burned out the colonies and the plague took Earth. 40 million people had lived here once, suspended in a pocket of compressed time to wait out the centuries until the galaxy was safe again. But something had gone wrong. The temporal field had destabilized. The city had started drifting backward through time, pulling itself into its own past, and everyone inside had begun experiencing their lives in fragments, moments scattered across decades. Some people lived the same day 1,000 times. Others aged years in seconds. The city had become a temporal loop, eating itself, and the only way to stop it was to anchor it to a fixed point. A moment that couldn't change. The moment we docked. I didn't understand. Voss explained it patiently, like she'd done this before. She said we'd been inside the structure for 43 years. Not hours. Years. We just hadn't experienced them linearly. Every time we tried to leave, the structure pulled us back, reset us, made us live the same salvage run again and again, because our arrival was the anchor point. The moment the timeline degraded far enough, the structure would collapse entirely, and 40 million people would be erased from existence across every point in time they'd ever occupied. But if we stayed, if we kept boarding the ship and docking and walking through those corridors, the structure could use us as a fixed reference. A moment that always happened the same way. We were the stable point. We were the thing that kept the city from unraveling completely. Rucker asked how long we'd have to stay. Voss said forever. Or until the timeline stabilized. Same thing, really. Chen didn't believe her. She grabbed the rifle and aimed it at Voss, told her to unlock the ship and let us leave. Voss didn't move. She just said, "I've already watched you die 6 times, Chen. 17 more versions of you are still walking through the lower sectors. You can shoot me if you want, but you're not leaving. None of us are." Chen pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. The rifle was empty. It had always been empty. Voss took it back gently. She told us there was food in the galley, quarters set up on the residential deck. We could make ourselves comfortable. It would be easier if we stopped fighting it. I asked if she'd stopped fighting. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She said, "I stopped 40 years ago. You'll get there." We didn't sleep that first cycle. Couldn't. We sat in the galley and watched the structure through the viewport. The towers were all lit now, every window glowing, and through them we could see people moving. Thousands of them. Living their lives in fragments, walking through rooms that existed in 5 different decades simultaneously, talking to versions of themselves that hadn't been born yet or had died centuries ago. Rucker asked if they knew. If the people in the city understood what was happening to them. Voss said some did. Most didn't. The ones who understood usually went to the outer sectors, to the edge of the structure where the temporal field was thinnest, and stepped out into the void. Faster that way. I asked how many times she tried to leave. She didn't answer. The ship's clock cycled forward. Hours passed, then days, but we didn't feel them. Sometimes I'd blink and find myself in a different room, surrounded by versions of the crew I didn't recognize. Sometimes I'd be alone. Once I spent what felt like 6 months repairing a hull breach that didn't exist, and when I finished the tools in my hands dissolved and I was back in the galley, Chen staring at me, asking if I was okay. I didn't know. Time wasn't reliable anymore. Cause and effect had become suggestions. I started seeing myself in the corridors, different versions, all doing different things. One was catatonic, sitting in a corner, rocking slowly. Another was working on the ship's systems with mechanical efficiency, like they'd done it 10,000 times. A third tried to warn me about something but I couldn't understand them. Their voice was stretched, distorted, moving too fast or too slow for me to parse. I found a log 1 cycle. My own log, written in my handwriting but covering events I didn't remember. It said I'd been inside the structure for 18 years. It said Rucker had found a way to collapse the temporal field but it required someone to stay behind, to anchor themselves to the moment of collapse and hold it stable. It said he'd volunteered. It said I'd watched him walk into the structure's core and vanish, and the field had stabilized for 6 days before resetting. It said I'd tried to stop him 400 times and failed every time. I didn't believe it. I couldn't. But when I went looking for Rucker I found 37 versions of him, all in different parts of the ship, and none of them recognized me. Chen went silent somewhere around the 20th cycle. Stopped responding, stopped moving, just sat in her quarters and stared at the walls. I tried to reach her but every time I got close the structure shifted and I'd end up somewhere else. I saw her once through a window, standing in the plaza, surrounded by frozen water that had started to flow again. She was older. Gray-haired. She looked at me and mouthed something I couldn't hear. It might have been, sorry. It might have been, help. The water rose around her, slow and thick, and she didn't move. Just let it cover her. When I found her quarters again she was sitting exactly where I'd left her, untouched, but her suit's clock said she'd been gone for 30 years. Voss stopped being Voss. I'd find her sometimes, different ages, different states. Once she was young, maybe 20, staring at me with terror like she didn't know where she was. Once she was ancient, skin translucent, and she grabbed my arm and told me I had to remember the numbers. I asked what numbers. She said, the ones you wrote in the core. The ones that keep us here. I didn't know what she meant. I didn't remember writing anything. But when I went to the core, following corridors that bent and twisted and refused to stay consistent, I found a chamber filled with screens, and every screen showed numbers. Coordinates. Temporal indices. And written across the wall in letters 10 meters tall was a message in my handwriting. It said, we are the anchor. We are the loop. We are the reason the city still exists. If we leave, 40 million people never existed. If we stay, we never leave. There is no solution. There is only duration. I don't know how long I've been here. The ship's clock says 43 years. My suit says 6 hours. My body feels like it's been centuries. I've watched Rucker die and reset and die again. I've found Chen in every state of decay and renewal. I've met versions of myself so old they don't remember their names. The structure keeps growing, keeps expanding, adding corridors and rooms that weren't there before, pulling in debris and lost ships and integrating them into itself. I've seen vessels from decades in the future, ships with designs we haven't invented yet, all docked and empty, their crews scattered through the timeline like us. I've stopped trying to leave. There's nowhere to leave to. The structure has become the only real thing. Outside is just void, empty space, but in here there's permanence. Broken permanence. Fragmented and looping and wrong, but permanent. Sometimes I dream about the moment we docked. The first moment. I remember seeing the message on the hull, "You should not have come back." I remember thinking it was a warning. But it wasn't. It was a statement of fact. We came back because we never left. We're still arriving, still boarding, still walking through those corridors for the first time, and we always will be. The structure needs us. The city needs us. 40 million people scattered across timelines that don't align, living their lives in fragments because we're here to hold the moment stable. We're the anchor. We're the loop. And I finally understand what the message meant. It wasn't written for us. It was written by us. 43 years from now, I'll scratch those letters into the hull from the inside, and I'll watch our ship approach, and I'll know we're already gone. I'll know we've been gone since the moment we arrived. I'll know there's nothing we can do to stop it because we're the thing that makes it happen. The city exists because we're trapped in it. We're trapped in it because the city exists. There's no beginning. There's no end. Just the endless moment of arrival, played over and over, slightly different each time, forever. And somewhere in the structure, in a corridor I haven't walked yet or walked 10,000 times, a version of me is reading this and understanding for the first time. And they'll think they can change it. They'll think they can escape. But they won't. Because I didn't. Because I'm still here. Because we never left.